welcome to Java. So today we're going to be starting with variables. You've probably used variables before in math. You can have a variable name like x, and you can store the number 5 in it, for example. It's kind of the same idea in coding. I like using this analogy of a box, where anything you put inside the box can be referenced by whatever you label the box as. So, for example, if you put the number 2 in here, and you smacked a label that had x on it, you could say x equals 2. Or if you put a person inside this box, you could say x equals person. There's a lot of different types of variables too, which you may be wondering why, because in math there's kind of only one type. It's just to store a number, really. But in coding, we have a whole bunch of different kinds, but also in our real world, we do too. So if someone talks to you, for example, and they're saying a sentence, you're probably going to process that as words and not as a number or an image or anything else like that. Versus if someone hands you like a piece of paper and it has their number on it, then you're probably going to process that as a number. So see how there's different data types? One of them was words and the other one was a number. It's kind of the same thing in coding. So we have 8 things called primitive types, which is just basically a very fundamental type of data in coding. So the first 4 we have here all have to do with integers. The reason there's 4 of them, even though they're all integer types, is because they all carry different sizes of memory. So a byte takes the least amount of memory and a long takes the most amount of memory. In this class, you'll be most likely using int for your integer types. For the next one, we have float and double, and these are decimal types. So if you ever have to represent any decimals, you're probably going to use a float or a double. This class will most likely use floats. And the next we have booleans, which are a true or false value. So for example, when I'm recording this video, it is sunny outside, so it is true that it is sunny. So the boolean would be true. And the final one is char, which is just a single letter. Here are some examples of some primitive types. So for example, 5 could be an integer, or 3.1415 could be a float or a double, and true could be a boolean, and the letter A could be a char. Alright, so the way we use these in Java is we have to follow this little recipe. So we start by saying the type. For example, if we want to make 5 in Java, we're going to say int, and then we're going to find a name for it, so we can call it number, or my number, or cool number, or whatever you want to call it. You can say, so you're going to say int number equals 5, just like that. Let's try a couple of these out. So I have a couple of examples here for you guys to try on your own. You don't have to type them out, but you can just think about them. Make sure you pay attention to what type of data you're storing. So for the first one, for example, we're storing the number 10, and we know that's a number, so you can infer that this is an integer type. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video here, try to do these on your own, and then I'll show the results in a little bit. Alright, so this is what I got for mine. So I said int x equals 10, and then I put a semicolon. Because in Java, most lines will end in a semicolon. There's a couple exceptions. It kind of just acts as a period to tell the computer, hey, this line is over. Let's stop reading here. Second one is to make a variable store the letter z. And notice that we just want a single letter. So I'm going to say char letter equals z. Something special about chars, though, is that they need a single quote around them to indicate that they're a single character. And then we put a semicolon. And the last one stores the temperature for today to 2 decimal points. So I kind of just made up a temperature. I don't know the exact temperature. But you could say float or double, but I picked float. And then temp for temperature equals my made-up number, and then semicolon. And one final thing about these examples is a little bit about naming things in Java. So for example, if you wanted to have a single word as your name in Java, so like x, letter, or temp, you're going to have that as all lowercase. These are just conventions that we use. And then if you want to have something that has multiple words in it, the first word is always going to be lowercase, and every other word after that will start with an uppercase. It's called camel case. So for example, if we want to say my letter instead of just letter, we're going to have my as lowercase, and the L in letter will be capitalized. Alright, and finally, we're going to do a little bit of typecasting, which just means changing between variable types. So there's another little recipe for this, where all you need to do is say the new type you want your variable to be, a new name, and then you say equals, parentheses, the same type you did earlier, and then the value. So for example, pretend we made a variable for pi earlier, we called it a float, but now we all of a sudden we want it to be an integer for some reason. So we're going to say int, because this is our new type we want it to be. Give it a new name, integer pi, whatever you want to call it, equals parentheses int. This is called casting, this little parentheses guy. And then you put whatever the value is. And the value just so happens to be a different variable. So the value is pi.